Shakespeare's Hamlet. We have no original text of the play signed by Shakespeare. Over 400 years after the writing, there's still no consensus as to what constitutes Shakespeare's Hamlet. We do not know what Shakespeare's master copy of Hamlet looked like, nor do we know how the play was performed. Today's texts, plural, of Hamlet, Shakespeare's longest play, contain incomplete, disputed, and possibly pirated best guesses. So with a lack of a definitive text also comes a lack of reliable stage directions. Typically, in Shakespeare's time, only the director would have the master copy of the play. And of course it would be handwritten. And he, in the margin, would add stage directions or remove stage directions to suit his will and to suit the venue, to suit wherever the play was being performed. So in the meantime, critics over the past centuries have said that Shakespeare was careless with stage directions. But Shakespeare may have been more cautious than careless. Politically speaking, it would have been safer for him to avoid writing some stage directions, even some spoken lines, into the script. This understanding requires a shift in the popular post-1660s views of Horatio, the Ghost, and Fortinbras, but it does not affect all of the play's themes. Casting Horatio as accomplice to Fortinbras requires adjusting the delivery of his lines to make Horatio's disposition one of control and intrigue, while, in my preference, projecting a degree of loyalty to Hamlet. Hamlet is a play, not a novel. So action, gesture, tone, speech, spectacle carry the story as much as words. And the interpretation I'm giving here takes nothing from the play, but I believe it adds depth and integrity. In this more complex view, spoken lines do not change, but they are enriched with more verve, humor, poignancy, context, and follow-through. In creating stage directions, the director can, by indirections, find directions out. In the last scene of the play, playgoers learn that Horatio writes the official version of the Tragedy of Hamlet. But sideshows, played out beneath the stage, on side stages, in the discovery space, this was a special place on Elizabethan stages, from the gallery or on outer and inner stage areas, would reveal collusions, deceptions, and Horatio's accidental judgments. One priority for staging, for me, is to include the characters and plot lines which Shakespeare brings to the play, which you could easily ferret out with this three-text Hamlet. Another priority is to leave the play in the appropriate time setting that I was talking about, those time limits. Taken out of those limits, Hamlet loses the effect of outdated full body armor, which is kind of the joke on Horatio, worn as a disguise. And this would also lose the loaded reference to Wittenberg, which was a seedbed of the Protestant Reformation. Changes in time setting, drastic text alterations, and the elimination of characters unique to Shakespeare's Hamlet persist because we neglect to seek Shakespeare's intention. Okay, before Hamlet dies, he sadly admits, "Things standing thus unknown shall live behind me." I imagine Essex and Mary Queen of Scots could have said the same thing. Because the powers that be in London, Cecil Walsingham in Mary Queen of Scots' case, and Robert Cecil in the Earl of Essex case, controlled their story. Before Hamlet dies, he sadly admits, "Things standing thus unknown shall live behind me." His fear is not for the passing of his life, but for the lives that will live after him. He knows death will seal his lips in silence. He knows that death is that undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns. Hamlet's plea for the living to tell what happened and his remark, "The rest is silence," are more evidence that Hamlet knows dead people do not come back to add narrations to stories, like the fake ghost of his father. That's left to the living, and who but Horatio could tell Hamlet's story? The spectator is left to draw his own inferences from what has happened in Hamlet and what one will be told to believe about him. Then and now, spectators would consider what forces behind life-changing events are being concealed through duplicity, reckless ambition, slander, and coercion. Not only does Hamlet show audiences the means by which authorities wield power and repress opposition, the play also shows how these same authorities will create and own the narrative. Also, some of what had been perceived or controlled as supernatural could now be revealed on the stage. By putting this magic on stage, the director guides spectators away from lingering beliefs in demons, magic, and witchcraft, while pointing out the dangers such beliefs can pose. The learned court would have had the edge on the general populace in regard to ghosts and supernatural. John Dee is an instructor, for example, and they would use this edge, as Horatio does, to control people. Intelligence services with techniques commonly used but beyond the understanding of the masses do the same today. While writing and editing his Hamlet in the very eventful decade straddling the turn of the century, it would have been clear to Shakespeare that survivors create history and perpetuate storylines. The play asks us to examine stories that legitimize harm and justify oppression. A future where everything will be explained by Horatio is the deepest tragedy for the Prince of Denmark. Okay, so three take-homes. First of all, the play is not a novel. It does not need words to communicate. Actions and gestures often communicate more than words, but the play does need a strong director. And the second thing, the themes and human interactions in this play are as moving and meaningful today as they were in Shakespeare's time. You'll see your life in the lives of the characters, in the mirror that Shakespeare puts in front of us. I fell in love with the play and with the research for this book, the contextual history. One book would lead me to another book, and then to another book, and then to another book, and you get the idea, right? So again, I needed my sister Shelley's urging to stop reading and get something on paper already. So here today you've had a close look at some of the ideas that I researched and went after and tried to defend. And the third thing, I did not come to the play as an academic. I came to the play and to the interpretation as a spectator. And then I searched out the sources to defend how I had heard and viewed the play. So I offer what is for us now 400 years later, possibly a new paradigm for understanding the play. But I believe it's the interpretation that Shakespeare would have preferred. So, yeah.
It's brilliant. I'm going to have to go back and read it in light of your interpretation.
Your thoughts make a lot of sense to me, that someone who knew the court intrigue had to have impacted the play somehow, if not the writer, the source person, or because the characters are pretty realistically drawn with the things that were happening in that time period. I wanted to emphasize the fact that this was a new idea that Carol came up with. This duplicitous Horatio, who
maybe wasn't just the two-dimensional buddy from college that shows up. Of course, there has been writings that Fortinbras and Horatio have been, were maybe in conjunction somehow, some way, but that the heart-wrenching feelings that Horatio must have also felt, if he had a conscience. Now, you know, we have that spectrum again. You know, was he just trying to get Hamlet elevated and get Claudius out of the way because he liked Hamlet, blah, blah, blah? Or was he really conniving, a sociopath that could really move on the scene and make things happen?